Hi, everybody. This is John Rude from Perceptual. I am so excited today to be joined by Sheron Fraser Burgess. Hey, Sheron. Good afternoon.
Hello. Hello.
Sharon is and has been a professor. So she has been a professor of the philosophy of education at Ball State University, is currently a lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania, and is founder of Being Better Humans Consulting. So really excited for today's conversation. And Sharon, given that background, like you've done a lot of interesting things in your career, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just to get us started about how did you kind of come through this way, right? Like how did you come from sort of the world of the philosophy of education to the work that you're doing today on artificial intelligence?
Oh, wonderful. First of all, thank you, John, for this wonderful opportunity to be in conversation with you, two people from domains of knowledge that don't intersect easily. So I just welcome the opportunity to have the conversation.
Thank you.
And I came in this way kind of accidentally. I was given an award for service to my field, and they asked me to create a speech, create a talk for the presentation. And I had been reading the book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Zuboff from MIT, I believe. And her argument essentially was that consumers were being co-opted into a relationship with Google that really interfered with their consent.
Mhm.
And that rather than being allowed to choose, what they wanted to buy, that Google, by the structure of its sort of revenue model, was actually shaping consumer choices in terms of what was made available to consumers based on tracking their sort of existence online. And so I was heavily into her paradigm that she was presenting by appealing to behaviorism. And so I wrote my talk based on this idea that there's this continuity of colonization that we were seeing replicated before our very eyes. And it was that year in 2023 that ChatGPT launched. And so I began kind of philosophically, broadly taking issue with the decentering of choice, of our own choice, our autonomy, and our agency. And then I just began to go into this deep dive. And then I started pursuing a graduate degree in information technology, which has led me into a sort of starting to write about AI governance and its overlap with philosophical ideas.
That's an amazing journey and obviously very timely. I mean, you were ahead of the curve, like while the rest of us were, first seeing that when ChatGPT came out, like you're really ahead of the game. So I wanted to ask you, as you've kind of thought about these issues, you've thought about these issues really deeply, as you think about, what you've been thinking about and how that kind of transitions into the world of practice and the world that AI governance professionals are doing at at companies, at governments, at nonprofits, et cetera. What are the frameworks that that I and the audience here of AI governance professionals should be learning about AI ethics?
Mhm. Yeah, so this is a critical question because we clearly see the higher education sector moving into AI education to offer the skilling, right, that's needed for the field. And so we clearly see like two different pathways. You have the governance pathway, which is related to ethics conceptually. So you governance uses value terms like responsible, trustworthy, fair, and unbiased. Those are all kind of value-based terms that any any ethicist or someone who has interest in ethics would be able to sort of resonate with that term. But these concepts actually have very concrete professional sort of association. So when
Mhm.
we're talking about um, fairness, we're really meaning that the data has to actually represent a wide enough an accurate sense of reality so that it is not biased. That's a very technical interpretation of fairness. Or a concept like trustworthy simply means that when we use the data, we can be confident at the level of, the higher level of data usage or, data engineering, that it actually does reflect a certain phenomenon. So that's trustworthiness, yes, but not in the way that an ethicist would think trustworthy would be interpreted. In the ethical world, we think of trustworthy as more related to the people who
Mm,
are the actual actors in the ecosystem of governance. And so, uh, in sort of developing a framework. Oh, the other piece, just to sort of talk about the division. So you have this AI governance, which is really a technical understanding of these terms that have a ethical, philosophical counterpart. But then you have this other piece that, for example, at the University of Buffalo, that's based on ontology, asking, what does it mean for AI to, what do we mean by these concepts? So when we are training AI at the level of machine learning, how are we uh, sort of systematically training it to match the word with the thing that it is, which is the ontology.
mm,
And so there's that piece. And of course, there's epistemology. What does it mean for AI to know or to make this claim, to make these assertions or offer these propositions, which really is dealing with this tendency that AI has to migrate into hallucination without no indicators that that is
mhm,
happening. And so that has ethical implications in terms of being trustworthy, in terms of the technology being trustworthy. So we have two different understandings of how we think about AI ethics in this governance and then in this kind of epistemological sort of component. There's a third part where I come, which is really underdeveloped, right? And it has to do with thinking of responsible AI
mhm,
it philosophically. And there is actually sort of a fair amount of emerging research and scholarship that looks at this broader sort of overarching questions that we ask when we implement AI. And that has to do with what asking questions about aims, like what purposes are we trying to achieve? What are our precepts or moral precepts that we want to take for granted about humanity and how we value human capabilities as a sort of unique set of beings in the universe. These are questions about like what do we owe each other
mhm,
and what do corporations owe the people that use its products, and how can we institute these regulatory processes as a counterpart to the philosophical values that we hold. And so it is that area where I'm kind of living and hoping to sort of elicit these questions, these broader questions in my own research.
What do you think? So that's a great discussion, and obviously we're just kind of scratching the surface of the
Right,
issues that you would raise there.
right.
If someone wanted to get really deep in these questions and kind of follow along, maybe not the exact path of your research, which is probably more in depth than most of us would be able to do. But are there like one or two books or like or journal articles or resources that someone coming into the field should like absolutely make sure that they read and understand?
Oh, so that's good. I'm just starting that research myself. I My speech was published um, from 2023 in a book called Voices, Philosophy of Education, Voices from the Field. And it's a book that's published with Palgrave. My speech is in chapter 10,
Hmm.
but it's also in my LinkedIn. I think I listed that speech, and little little was I aware at the time of how
Hmm.
prescient that speech was,
Hmm.
because it's there's a paradigm that I do propose about how we evaluate the sort of ethical integrity of AI. And it's predicated on this concept of wanting to obscure or get in the way of neo-slavery, which sounds like a very heavy concept. But
Hmm.
there's a set of questions that we ask, who owns it? Who has the right to use it? And there's a third question that I've missed, but there's a set of questions that comes. Who
Hmm.
has a right to it? Who owns it? Who uses it, and who has a right to
Hmm.
use it? And so this question is based on what chattel slavery elicited in our culture.
Hmm.
So the the sort of premise of my book is that we have the potential to replicate slavery, or be in a form of neo-slavery. And I was really heartened to hear about Varoufakis's book. He was a former finance minister from Greece, and he makes a similar argument, but he uses feudalism as the model.
Hmm.
He said that we are really entering into a form of feudalism with big tech companies like Amazon who get a cut out of everything we do. And so his argument is from feudalism. My argument is from slavery, and saying that in order for us to not replicate the conditions of slavery, this time the overlords being the big tech companies who who really disrupt our right to our property, there are
Hmm.
questions that we need to be asking all along the way. And we need to sort of institute regulations that provide defensible answers to these questions. For example, when it comes to intellectual property, who owns it? And do we value ownership as like a axiomatic status?
Hmm.
And so that humans cannot be owned, that would mean that they have agency about that which they produce. And so fundamentally, we need to push back at every effort of these big tech company to blur the lines or make more ambiguous this notion of human right to their property. And so this speech is called First They Came for Me.
Hmm.
Um, when it's premised on this idea of Niemöller, who gave this speech um, after he had been imprisoned by the Nazis. And at the time, it seemed somewhat hyperbolic, but now not so much.
Hmm.
Um, and so, but he started with the people at the highest rung of society, and finally those who at the finally they came for those people who are at the highest rung, and they said there was nobody to defend me. But I wanted to give voice to the people at the lowest rung of society who are saying, hey, they came for us and we told you this is how it works. First, they dilute this notion of human ownership. And once they dilute this notion of human ownership and the agency to exercise control over that ownership, then we begin to erode this line of humans being overlords or subjugating
Hmm.
others. And so I wrote it from that perspective of someone saying, we know what this looks like, and technology, and in particular, artificial intelligence, is beginning to show the aspects of this subjugation. And this was in 2023. Now in 2026, we see that process has been even more sort of, it's gone even more deeply. So that's my work, and
Hmm.
I'm doing some research right now. I'm actually developing a research study to um, to survey business leaders about this notion of governance. How do they understand it? And to ascertain whether this more open-ended set of questions about human sort of agency is showing up on their radar
Mhm.
when they think about the goals of governance of artificial intelligence in managing the data that they have, that their company uses.
It's a great answer, and we'll make sure that we link to the your paper on LinkedIn onto your profile. As we're recording this in late May of 2026, our industry and the issues that you're discussing are actually in the news, which is pretty unusual because the Pope has issued his papal encyclical on the use of AI, and you and I were going back and forth before we hit record a little bit on that earlier. So I'd love to get, it's still kind of early in that journey. It just happened. I'd love to get your early opinions on that happening.
hmm Yes, you could almost predict based on what I said before, that I would agree with the Pope's orientation in the sort of edict that he offered to raise the alarm about the way that artificial intelligence industries have been given carte blanche in almost every sector of our society and well, the world, and efforts to, put up guardrails have been undermined in one way or the other. For example, in the UK, we know that the GDPR has been a firewall that has
Mhm.
actually managed to keep Google and Microsoft in check. However, through surveillance technologies that Palantir really served, offered, the UK, in a sense, some of those guardrails have been, if not undermined, circumvented, and always with a justification of providing us greater security, or some other subterfuge. We are forced to trade one freedom
Mhm.
for what we think we will get, like such as security. And so, what the Pope is calling for is really a halt to allow time to really think about the kind of society we want and the kind of world we wanted. And I think it's Jeffrey Hinton, who was the founder of the kind of training of artificial intelligence that really led to the technology um, of ChatGPT and Claude. He was a biologist, right? And his idea, he's been warned, he warned these companies that before we sort of scaled up the technology, that there needed to be time devoted to think about what our goals are. And that is not happening. In fact, even the CEO of NVIDIA recently said this mass layoff kind of movement is actually not necessary, and he actually said it was lazy.
Mhm.
It's the corporations wanting to secure greater control to protect themselves from economic risk by getting ahead of the game. But in doing so, they're not thinking about the social costs. They're not being very imaginative about how artificial intelligence and human flourishing could actually happen together. And so the Pope is essentially saying we need to privilege humanity because we're all we have, folks. And so also there's a beauty to humanity, to our creativity, to, believing as he does that we're made in the image of God, the Imago Dei. And so each person is unique. And so ultimately, should not be made to serve the technology. The technology should be made to serve us. And so essentially, there needs to be this movement towards holding these companies accountable in their determination to subjugate us to their return on investment
Mhm.
and the need to be essentially masters of the universe.
It's such a great topic. And I wanted to zoom in on one other issue because you're just the absolute world-class expert on this, which is the intersection of philosophy plus AI plus education, which is with
Mhm.
the world that you'd come from previously. What are the big issues that you see in the world of education today related to AI responsibility?
Right. Yes, that's an excellent question. Thank you for it. And we in K-12 education, um, state state associations have basically been left on their own as the companies have approached, departments of education and districts about their platforms, right? To integrate AI into K-12 education in different ways. There's been very little guidance provided by the Department of Education. And so teachers, for the most part, right now, it's like the wild, wild west. Let's just think of it like that. Think of, when in the 1800s and, people were sort of going into the expansion of the West, there were no regulations. It was just every man for himself. Well, it's the wild, wild west right now in education. And school district by school district decisions about student privacy, um, data protection, all of those questions are being answered on a individual basis. And
Mhm.
even the guidances that came down from the White House, which said that basically that parents should have a final say about how much access the different forms of artificial intelligence and the platforms that are used in different subjects have to student data. That policy guidance was not followed by any kind of systematic implementation. So there's no uniform, uh, I think I can safely say that approach that we can say now is education policy in K-12. In higher education, the integration, I think, has been somewhat more organized
Mhm.
as policies. That there have been different policy rollouts by, for example, Stanford University has been very good about this in creating in sort of these policy papers that have provided guidance about the classroom level integration of AI platforms. Um, at the administrative level, I think that is where we're not, we're very much in the process. Universities don't have AI officers in their administrative layer.
Mhm.
They and they're starting to hire, and even the people that they do bring in may not have the combination of the artificial intelligence background and the higher education background. So they may have the technical knowledge, but they don't have the academic knowledge. So it's, clearly, so these are sort of, this is the state of affairs right now. The AI implementation is very much at the classroom level
Mhm.
in terms of, being between the instructor and the student, and sort of professors figuring out what their policy is going to be on ChatGPT. Um, but yeah, so that's it's very much a mixed bag of policies and experiences right now in higher ed.
Well, Sharon, that's an amazing overview. And I want to make sure to be sensitive to your time. And that's, we said we'd record for about 20, 30 minutes. And this has just been such an incredible thought starter, at least for me, and I think for my audience as well. We'll make sure to put the links to your paper, your LinkedIn link to the paper, in the show notes. And then if people want to be in touch with you or follow you or learn more, what's the best way to find you?
The best way to find me is on through LinkedIn, really. That's where they can inbox me, and I'm also uh, I have a website for Being Better Humans Consultancy on if you look if you sort of put advancing ethics and presence in democracy, it should pop right up. So that's one way that you can sort of find out what I do and be able to contact me.
Great. Sheron, thank you so much for your time. It's been
Yeah.
a joy, and our audience is going to love this discussion.
All right, thank you so much, John. It's been my pleasure.